In this video for BPK 417 Obesity Weight Management course, we are finally going to start moving into obesity management. So we have spent this course talking about complexity, minimizing weight bias, and trying to understand all the different influences that can affect an individual's weight and the effect weight can have on our health. Now that we have that knowledge with us, how do we use it to help individuals manage their weight? And unsurprisingly, it's going to really depend on the individual, and as well, it's going to depend on your particular scope of practice as well. So this video is aimed a little bit more medically. Granted, I know there are students in this class that are thinking more towards like physiotherapy or personal training or a range of other possibilities, but there's a lot of fundamentals in this lecture that can be applied to any particular discipline. So here are your learning objectives. So what I'm going to do to frame our conversation of obesity management is I'm going to contrast two frameworks. I'm going to talk about the 5 A's of obesity management, which is Dr. Michael Vallis, Dr. Arya Sharma, and Dr. Yanni Friedhoff, who originally came up with this. And we're going to contrast that with some information from the Obesity Algorithm, which has a lot of contributors and is a main publication of the Obesity Medicine Association. Both of these are based not only on evidence of best practice, but also clinical experience as well, as it's mainly clinicians that have been working in obesity care that have helped make these frameworks. So in this introduction to obesity management, we're going to focus on the first part of the obesity algorithm and the first 2 A's of the 5 A's of obesity management. So the first part of the obesity algorithm really focuses on framing obesity as a disease, which is the lens that we have taken in this course as well. So remember, obesity is defined as a chronic, progressive, relapsing, and treatable multifactorial neurobehavioral, we've definitely covered that in this course, disease, wherein an increase in body fat promotes adipose tissue dysfunction. We talked about sick fat disease and abnormal fat mass physical forces. We also talked about fat mass disease in this course, resulting in adverse metabolic, biomechanical, and psychosocial health consequences. So again, we've talked about the comorbidities of obesity. We haven't just focused on chronic physical diseases, we've also focused on psychology as well. And then again, in the first beginning of this course, we talked about Obesity Canada's framing of obesity as a disease and not as a personal failure or a lack of willpower. We do not use those simplistic narratives. I love that it says it here too. Recognizing it as a chronic disease helps it remove stigma and shift the focus to compassionate, evidence-informed healthcare. Yes. So the second part of the obesity algorithm that is in line with the first A of the 5 A's framework is this concept of patient-centered communication. So now that we've framed obesity as a disease, let's think about the people we're talking to and how we're talking to them and how do we form a helping relationship with individuals, right? So patient-centered communication, according to the Institute of Medicine, is providing care that is respectful to and responsible to individual patient preferences, needs, and values, and ensuring that patient values guide all clinical decisions. It is not you giving someone a food guide and saying, here, eat like this, and it's definitely not you telling someone to just eat less and move more. That is not patient-centered communication. And then this is in line with the first A of the 5 A's system of obesity management, which says that you ask. You start by asking, right? Weight is a sensitive issue. Do not assume every patient with a larger body has obesity. We talked about the Lancet Commission and how that defines obesity. Ask for permission to discuss body weight. And if they say they do not want to talk about it, prioritize the relationship, because that can help to get that patient more towards its health needs than pushing someone potentially towards an adversarial relationship where trust can potentially be compromised. Does the person feel like their weight is impairing their medical, functional, or psychosocial health? So a good place to start, the ask, which again is part of patient-centered communication. Would it be all right if we discussed your weight? If the patient is not ready to discuss their weight, offer resources about obesity as a chronic disease and an open opportunity to reassess. Right? So maybe they're not ready now, but maybe after some time of building that relationship and understanding their body a bit more and doing diagnostic tests, perhaps, maybe then if that person wants to, then that would be a time. And this is also a good time to talk about how not everyone has a weight-based focus towards their health. And there are ways of improving someone's health without focusing specifically on a number on the scale. If someone's improving their cardiorespiratory fitness, if someone's improving their muscular mass, they are reducing their risk of chronic disease, even if their weight doesn't change. Yes, weight loss can often ameliorate those things as well, but it's not the only definitive path there. This focus on patient-centered communication, it brings us back to our first unit on weight bias and people first language, and as well as terms that you might want to use when talking about weight, terms that individuals with obesity tend to feel are less stigmatizing. But really, it's going to depend on the person. Some people have no problem with the F word, the fat word. Okay, some people really, really don't like that. That is a very triggering word to me, and I wouldn't use it. Some people use it for themselves. We can't assume that everyone is the same, and that's why the relationship is so important, as I keep saying. And another thing that we can talk about when it comes to patient-centered communication and patient-centered care is this trauma-informed approach. So in this course, we talked about adverse childhood experiences and how those can increase risk of obesity. And not everyone with obesity has had adverse childhood experience or adverse experiences or has trauma, but that is something that could be part of someone's complex array of factors that are promoting obesity. You want to avoid re-traumatizing, and some guiding principles of trauma-informed care are like trying to establish a safe space, trustworthiness, and transparency. If you need to refer someone out to a mental health specialist, I am not a mental health specialist, and I'm not able to give someone the care they need if they are dealing with trauma, and I would definitely try to connect them to resources that would help them. Collaboration and mutuality, agreeing on treatment goals as opposed to telling them what to do, empowering them, and then some understanding of some cultural, historical, and gender issues as well that might factor into that conversation. There are some marginalized groups that are less trusting of doctors for very good reasons, and that is actually part of their trauma. And I won't get into all of it, but, look up Canadian First Nations history with the medical system, and that can tell you a lot right there. So again, patient-centered communication, so important as one of the foundations of caring for individuals with obesity. And it's not just about obesity, but all care should be focused on the individual and not the care provider telling the other person exactly what they need to do, but forming more of a collaborative relationship. And some of these things I've been talking about really brings back these concepts from the complexity unit as far as how we promote change in complex systems. And if we look at this waters of systems change concept from Kania, Kramer, and Senge, we're really focusing on that middle part, trying to shift power dynamics and try to empower the individual we're working with. So it's not just us telling them what to do, but that they are an active participant in their own well-being, right? And the relationship and improving that relationship between healthcare provider and patient or client, that's going to be a key. And this is something that can sometimes be part of what transforms mental models. And I would also argue when a healthcare practitioner really starts listening more to the people that they're caring for, they can understand what's actually going on, not just what they think is going on, and maybe advocate for policies and structural change that can help those individuals better as well, right? So a lot of complexity factors into here as well. Also speaks to more of a focus on relationality as opposed to transactionality, right? Transactionality is someone comes into my office, I'm a doctor in this scenario, and they tell me they want to lose weight, and I give them a diet book. Right? You come in to get something from me, I give it to you, bye-bye, see you later. I don't know anything about this person. I haven't built the relationship with them. Maybe that book works, probably doesn't. That affects trust right there. And that's not necessarily going to build the kind of relationship that's going to help care be long-term. Because remember, obesity is a chronic progressive disease. So it's probably not going to take one visit for us to help manage the behaviors and the complications of obesity. So how do we build that long-term relationship and do so in a way that's respectful of the people that we're working with and that promotes trust and promotes dialogue, and that requires time. And so it requires a shift in our mental models. So the next part of the obesity algorithm that also comes in the 5 A's of obesity is this data collection, evaluation, and assessment part, right? So this is the assess part of the 5 A's. So understanding an individual's story and life context is crucial. So you might want to know like why they want to change. That could be part of it, but also perhaps you need to classify their obesity before you actually even think of what treatment that person might want to go through. You could use the Edmonton Obesity Staging System. You can use the Lancet Commission's protocol for diagnosing preclinical and clinical obesity. But this stage is really about data collection. And then this second part of this is from the obesity algorithm here. This gives you some ideas of some of the data that you might want to collect. So history of that person, history of their weight, history, if they want to talk about it, past medical history, family history. You're collecting the same data you would collect from anyone as well. You might want to do a physical examination, which may or may not include weighing, depending on what's going on. Know their medications that they're on, for instance. And then laboratory tests are probably really important as well. Don't just assume that someone has really high A1C. Don't just assume that someone has high blood lipids, that someone has high LDL cholesterol and low HDL cholesterol. Don't assume those things. You test for those things. And again, it would really depend on that person and, what country you're in and how expensive these things are as well. That's unfortunately part of the consideration, but this is all about collecting data so we can properly assess someone and then maybe evaluate what is the next course of action as well. As far as measuring specifically for obesity, we do want to know more than BMI typically to diagnose obesity. Percent body fat, obviously, if you have access to a DEXA, that would be the best, or a bod pod, that would be the best. That's not always the case, but BMI +1 is what the Lancet Commission recommends, or the Edmonton Obesity Staging System is another option for categorizing a person as far as their weight status goes. Okay, so remember, this is just a call out for the Edmonton Obesity Staging System. We saw this earlier in the course. This breaks down the 5 potential stages of the EOSS. Stage 0 would be perhaps a higher BMI, but basically no other apparent risk factors. And then from stage 1 to 4, we move from subclinical physical, mental, and functional limitations to more severe limitations. Okay. And just a side note about the Edmonton Obesity Staging System, it has been shown to be more effective than BMI alone at predicting mortality. So this study looks at 2 cycles of the NHANES data set. So NHANES, National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It's kind of like the Canadian Health Measures Survey, where they actually are taking measurements and taking samples as well from people in addition to self-reported information. So it's a more comprehensive health screening, and they collect that information and they keep it, and then they can follow up with these individuals. So for instance, in this study, they looked at, I have this NHANES data from the 1988 to 1994 cycle and from the 1999 to 2004 cycle of these people that I measured for all these different things who passed away before 2006. That's kind of what this study looked at. And so the top panels look at the 1988 to 1994 NHANES data set, and they categorized people in the NHANES data set according to BMI categories and according to Edmonton Obesity Staging System categories. And you'll notice on the panel on the left, their EOSS was better at predicting mortality. So a lower number here. So 1 means that 100% of those people survived, and a 6 means that 0.6 means that 60% of those people survived. Individuals who were stage 3 of the Edmonton Obesity Staging System unsurprisingly had a higher mortality risk compared to those with 2, 1, and 0 stage. However, BMI alone was not able to clearly differentiate between mortality risk. And we saw the same kind of thing, although there was a shorter time period between this data set and when mortality was assessed. We saw the same from the 1999 to 2004 cycle. So main take-home message is Edmonton Obesity Staging System is a better, at least mortality risk predictor than BMI alone. Although I'm not presenting data on this, it's also better at predicting development of heart disease as well. Okay. And again, another diagnostic tool that could be used as far as determining adiposity is that Lancet Commission diagnostic criteria for clinical obesity. And remember, obesity is defined as high fat mass that promotes disease. So how do we assess fat mass first? BMI alone? BMI +1, or if you have direct measures like DEXA. Okay, so that diagnoses obesity, but then is it preclinical or clinical? Preclinical would mean that fat mass is higher, but they don't have any of these obesity-related organ dysfunctions or limitations of daily activities. And then still on the data collection side of things, there are many different questions that we can ask. And for our purposes, I want you to know the different categories. And if I were to select something from here, you should be able to put it into the right category of type of question or type of data point to collect. And why are we doing this? We are trying to embrace complexity, and we're trying to understand a person and understand that every person's case is different. And again, it's also about hearing someone and hearing their story. And I know that that is easier said than done, given the limited amount of time that at least Canadian doctors have with their patients. And that makes it complicated. And so maybe not all of these questions are asked the first time, but these maybe come out over time as well. But the idea here isn't to get overwhelmed by the data, but to use the data to inform good care and good relationship. So in this lecture, we just really covered the first part of the 5 A's and the first part of the obesity algorithm. This is like before any advice or collaboration or decision-making happens. We come from a good mental model, we build a healthy relationship with people, and we collect data that can inform decision-making. In the next section, we'll explore the rest of the 5 A's and the rest of the obesity algorithm. But before we get there, it's really important for us to understand 2 concepts. Number 1 is how weight can bounce back. So we're going to understand the physiology of the weight-reduced state first. And also, it's important that we review motivational interviewing, because motivational interviewing is a great patient-centered approach, collaborative approach that can help guide treatment. So see you in the next videos.